So, welcome to Denmark. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing in Denmark?
Sure. Well, my name is Bailey Pryor, and I own a rum company. I'm here to promote the Real McCoy Rum and talk about rum in general and the difference between really high-quality spirits within the rum category and the sort of lower tier products like industrial alcohol and what the differences are. Because so many people think that just rum is rum. But the reality is there's a huge difference in different types of rum, and we're here to discuss that.
Correct. So what separates the Real McCoy Rum from other rum brands in the market?
Well, it's not an industrial rum product. Industrial rum is made from a large column still, typically 4 or 5 towers that you see at different distilleries, made very quickly, very inexpensively. We're a totally different product. We're made primarily with a pot still. So our product is a little more expensive because of the pot still distillate, because basically a pot still can make in 18 hours what a column still can make in 1 hour. But the real difference is that the column still makes essentially like a molasses vodka. It's kind of, not very flavorful, not very aromatic, but the pot still makes very flavorful, very aromatic, very naturally beautiful products. So when you look at rum, you have to understand that there's a difference between industrial alcohol and then a finely crafted pot still rum.
Can you maybe present the 3 expressions?
Sure. We have our 3-year aged white rum. So that actually comes out of the barrel after 3 years of aging looking a lot like this. It's a little bit lighter, but essentially it looks almost the same color. And that's because the barrels, the wooden barrels, actually give it that patina, that color to it. And then we filter it back to white because people have been trained to think that white rum is what you use for mixed cocktails. So we create that particular product for that. Our 5-year rum is much more of like they're all actually made exactly the same way. They just have different time in the barrel. So you have a little more barrel influence, the wooden bourbon casks. And it's beautiful. It's a very balanced product. It's our #1 seller. People who like bourbon often go for our 5-year. We find that happening quite often. And then we have our 12-year aged rum. That's, again, a finely crafted product, and it's been in the barrel for 12 years. So, the 3-year might be a little bit lighter and fruitier, sort of, in its flavor profile. The 5-year might have a little more caramel and vanilla flavor than the 3. And then when you get into the 12, you start adding big, beautiful earth tones and wood and char and things like that. So that's just what's happening in the barrel. And since all 3 products are made exactly the same way, with the same fermentation, the same sugarcane source, the same distillation process, it's the time in the barrel that makes the primary difference between the 3. So there's no difference in recipe because we don't add anything to it. There's no added sugars or flavors or aromatics. So it's kind of a time machine. It's one of the few rums you can do this with where you taste the 3-year, and then the only difference between the 3 and the 5 is more time in the barrel. So, and it's radically different. It's amazing, actually. And then you taste the 12, and again, the only difference is just time. So it's a beautiful way to taste rum. It's very rare to do that because most rums have some kind of a recipe that makes them different. They add different flavors or things like that. We don't do any of that. It's all very clean, very natural.
Can you tell us a little bit about the maturation going on in Barbados versus European barrel aging? Sure. Say in Scotland.
Sure. Well, maturation is a hugely important component to the process of making rum. The most important phase is fermentation. That's where you get about 80% of your flavor profile is from the choices you make in fermentation. Distillation, the next step, is really just the extraction of alcohol. So stills don't add any flavor at all. They just extract the alcohol that has the flavor in it from fermentation. But the third step is maturation. And there you get a little bit of barrel influence. And the barrels do interesting things to the rum. Essentially, what's happening is the barrel acts as a giant sponge. And you put the rum inside of it, and the wood soaks it up. And when it gets hot and cold, it kind of has this interaction with the wood. And in different territories around the world, you have different amounts of effect from that barrel over time. So in Scotland, for example, you might lose 1 or 2% of the contents of the barrel to evaporation. It's called the angel's share. And in Kentucky or Tennessee, making bourbon, they might lose 3%, 2, 3, maybe 4%. You go down to Barbados, where our rum is made, and they lose between 6 and 8% every year, and that's a tremendous amount. So when you get to the point where you have, you know, for example, 100 barrels, and you set 100 barrels down, you let them sit for 12 years, in the case of our 12-year rum, so much evaporation has occurred that about roughly a third of the barrel is left. Everything else is evaporated. That's a lot of loss. If you had the same evaporation, you know, you had the same 12 years in Scotland, you'd only lose a little bit, you know, and in Kentucky a little bit more, but in Barbados it's a lot. So that's what they mean when they say things like Caribbean aging, where they say a 5-year rum is the same as a 15-year Scotch, right? That's the point. I'm not sure if that's entirely accurate, but that's what people say. It's great marketing. There is definitely great wood influence very quickly in the Caribbean, anywhere along the equator that you age a product. But there's definitely the economic loss. A large amount of what you've created has evaporated. So that makes it more expensive. And that's really the difference between a fine barrel aged rum and you know, an industrial rum that just has, you know, coloring added to it and sugar added to it. It's never been inside of a barrel. Yet a lot of times you'll find people try to sell it for the same price. You know, so dark rum is what they call it. And all that's doing is just distracting you from the fact that it's not an aged rum. It's really just been in stainless steel its whole life. They put a little ink and sugar in it, and they think, hey, we'll sell it for 40 bucks. You know, that's not what they should do. Finely aged pot still rum is really worth it. In the same way that a fine Scotch whiskey is really worth the investment and really, you know, lovely experience. And then there's cheap whiskeys out there too that, you know, people don't like, and they're cheap or whatever, you know, or maybe you do like, but they don't try to sell them in the same way that they do in rum. Rum's a little bit broken in that way. So you should always look for the fine age statement, the real age statement that says aged 5 years, those exact words. If it says other things, you know, very old, slow age, things like that, those are not age statements. Those are all fake. They're just trying to kind of trick you into thinking that it's older than it is.
Term true rum or authentic Caribbean rum, could you expand on that? What makes the Real McCoy a true rum, a real rum?
Sure. Real rum is an interesting concept because it implies that there's fake rum, and that's the case. I mean, I would say any rum is rum, sure, but there are rums that are pretending to be something that they're not, and usually what they're pretending to be is aged or pot still with big flavor. If you're making a column still rum, the column still is very efficient at extracting alcohol, so it makes it very quickly and very inexpensively, but it's not very interesting in flavor. So those rums typically, in today's marketplace, those manufacturers will put something in it to make it more interesting. They might add some flavors and they might add some colors and things like that. And that isn't necessarily wrong, it's just a style. You know, there's sweet style rums and they put sugar in them and things like that. And there's dry style rums. We're a dry style rum, entirely dry style. We don't add anything to our rum. And that's what, you know, we believe makes it a very fine product because it's so much harder to make our rum. It's so much more expensive to make our rum. We're not adding, you know, chemicals. We're not adding artificial flavors. I mean, some brands buy artificial tobacco flavoring from flavor companies and put it in the rum. And then you sip it and they say, oh, do you taste the tobacco note? You know, well, that's made by some lady in a lab coat in a test tube. And that's where the flavor comes from, not from the barrel, not from the process of fermentation, not from the artistry and the authenticity of making a fine product. That's what real rum is, and that's why some rum is more expensive, is a nicer product, is worth the investment, and is a very different experience, especially the nice dry style rums, than the stuff that's just industrial marketing fake. So we like to use the term real rum.
Real McCoy Rum is produced by Richard Seal at Foursquare Distillery.
Yes.
What separates the Real McCoy from other products that Richard are producing, rum products?
Yes, so our rum is made at Foursquare Distillery in Barbados by master distiller Richard Seal, 4th generation to run the company. They're very talented people. Richard is an extremely talented, well-respected master distiller. And he's just built a phenomenal facility, and he makes great rums. So there's a difference between his rums. The one thing in common with all of his rums is that all of them are authentically made. You know, he uses the same sources of sugarcane supply or molasses supply. He does the same fermentation process. He does the same distillation process. He varies his maturation processes, and that's what creates some of the separation in the different expressions that he makes, the different brands that he makes. In our case, with the Real McCoy, we have more pot still than rum than any other expression of rum or any other brand of rum that he makes. So you get those big pot still flavors and aromas that only come from a device like that because they haven't extracted all that alcohol. They're not as efficient as pulling the alcohol out. But it's a very flavorful rum, and it's different than any other rum that he makes. And I've often been at the distillery, and we'll sit down and go through the different brands and kind of taste how they all are slightly different. And it's really amazing, actually, when you think about it, because just differences in the amount of time in a barrel makes huge difference between the expressions of our rum. But in Richard's case, the amount of blending of column and pot still makes a big difference, because he has a two column coffee still, the traditional 1840s technology, the stuff that you use for a lot of Scotch whiskeys, actually. And then he's got this beautiful 1,500 liter copper pot still. And like I said, the column still makes a balanced and light rum, but it's not very flavorful or aromatic. And he has this beautiful pot still rum, which is very flavorful and very aromatic. And in many cases, it's a little too much for some people. So Richard blends the two. And the amount of that blend is what makes the difference between a lot of his expressions, primarily. Then there's other things that he does. He'll finish some products in port casks, or he'll be in different types of wood for others, or longer or shorter periods of time in wood, and that's what makes the difference.
The goal for the Real McCoy Rum, what is that? What's the goal?
The goal for the Real McCoy Rum is world domination. But no, the goal is to bring real rum to people and to raise awareness of the fact that real rum exists. It's a really interesting thing in the rum category, because for so many years, I mean, even decades now, people have been talking about light and dark rum, right? That is completely irrelevant to the rum discussion, right? Light and dark just means how much artificial food coloring did you put in your rum. That doesn't make it any better. Because it's a dark rum, it must be better because you added coloring. That doesn't make any sense. Aged and unaged is the real discussion in rum, because the good aged rums don't require additives like sugars and flavors and fake aromas and colors. They're getting it all naturally from the wood, and that's the right way to do it. That's the traditional way to do it. So it's okay that those guys make that stuff and it's inexpensive and you put it in drinks and whatever, but the reality is, if you want a really finely created, crafted product, you want an aged product. You want it to be involving a certain amount of pot still rum. You want it to be something that they don't have to add sugars and flavors to hide the mistakes or the fact that it's just industrially produced really quickly and therefore isn't that good. So they put this other stuff in it to make it a little more palatable. Because in the end, do you really want to be comparing the flavorings that were made in a test tube at some flavor company, or do you want to be comparing beautiful wood notes? Do you want to be comparing things that are real? That's what we're trying to bring to people. That's the goal of the Real McCoy.
Can you recommend a specific rum cocktail with either one of the McCoys?
Yeah, my favorite cocktail is the Dirty Barbados. It's a fantastic cocktail. We make it with our 5-year rum, and it's a ginger-infused simple syrup. So you just take some sugar, take some water, boil it down. You can do this at home. Shave some fresh ginger into it, and it'll be this beautiful little ginger-infused simple syrup. Then we take fresh squeezed lime juice, and we blend those two together, shake it up with the rum. You throw in a dash of orange bitters, like an Angostura, and then you pour that in a rocks glass and over ice. And then you take a little sprinkle of sea salt and sprinkle the salt on top of the ice. And it's a beautiful cocktail because it has the sweet from the simple syrup. It's got the citrus sour. It's got a little bit of the interesting orange bitters. So you got the sweet sour bitters. And then you've got the salt on top. And it's an incredibly balanced cocktail. It's beautiful. And it was made by James Wayman at the Oyster Club restaurant in Mystic, Connecticut. And it's just spectacular. It's the most refreshing limeade you've ever had. And you'll get one of these and you'll just go, and it's gone, and you'll say, "I'll have 4 more, please." It's just lovely.